Tetze, when you go, God's trumpet call presence, 6th reading from the book of Deuteronomy, 49th reading from the Torah. Outline of Torah portion. Laws concerning family and home. Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 10 to verse 21. This portion of the Parsha deals with 3 distinct topics. Women captives, verse 10 to 14. In the ancient world, it was common for a man to take a wife from among the captives, especially if the woman is beautiful. Specific commands were given to Israel to avoid any abuse of the captive women. If one finds a beautiful woman among the captives and desire to take her as his wife, then he is to bring her to his house. She is to shave her head and trim her nails. This is to make the captive woman purified and humbled, signifying a complete break with her past and willingness to start anew. Shaving the head was a sign of her renouncing her religion and becoming a proselyte to that of the Jews. She shall put off the clothes of her captivity and remain in the house, and mourn her father and her mother a full month. The woman is given time to mourn her past associations, a time to resolve issues for both parties. The change of garments suggests a change of status. If the man decides not to marry her, then he is to free her with dignity. These laws gave protection to the captive women. Inheritance rights, verse 15 to 17. If a man has 2 wives, and if one wife is more favored or loved than the other, the inheritance rights of the firstborn son of the unloved wife is to be respected even if he were the son of the unloved wife. The firstborn son received twice as much inheritance as any other son. The rebellious son, verse 18 to 21. This reference is made to a son who has passed the age of accountability, who is determined to rebel against his father and mother. This law is not referring to a child or a teen. To call a rebellious son to account, the parent must have done their part in raising him to obedience and disciplining him. Such a stubborn and rebellious son was to be put on trial before the elders of the city. If the court accepts he is rebellious, then they execute him. Though these verses do not make it clear, the criteria to be considered rebellious are specific and impossible to fulfill. Gemara, Sanhedrin 71a states that there never was a rebellious son who was executed. Here we have a valuable lesson about human nature and about raising children. Miscellaneous laws. Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 22 to 22:7. Corpse of a person who has committed a capital crime. Verse 22 to 23. If a man has committed a sin deserving of death and then he is to put to death, the corpse is to be hung on a tree. But the body is not to remain overnight on the tree. You are to bury him the same day, so that the land will not be defiled. For he who is hanged is accursed of God. In the thinking of ancient Israel, the worst fate was to die and have your corpse left exposed to shame, humiliation, and to scavenging animals and birds. Yeshua HaMashiach died in the place of his people. He took their place as the accursed of God, being hung on a tree in open shame and degradation. He received the curse which we deserved and not him, so that the people could receive the blessing of Abraham, which he deserved, and not us. Laws concerning animals and lost property. Verse 1 to 4. The Lord commanded, "You shall not see your brother's ox or sheep going astray, and hide yourself from them." In this law, God is addressing that sin of doing nothing for a brother in need. According to this law, to see a brother in need and to do nothing is to do evil. When you can do good, you are not to hide from it. Here is addressed an element of responsibility that goes beyond ordinary standards of righteousness. We are not only responsible not to harm our fellow men, but also responsible to prevent harm from being done to them when it is our power to do so. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, Luke chapter 10, verse 31 to 32, the priest and the Levite avoided helping the needy man, which was a breach of this law. Lost objects. You are to do same with his donkey and his garment and any lost thing. When something is lost animal or object, a finder must make every effort to restore it to the owner. Exodus chapter 4 to 5 extends the obligation to the stray animals for an enemy. Command to keep a distinction between the sexes in clothing. Verse 5. The Lord commanded that a woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man, nor shall a man put on a woman's garments, for those who do so are an abomination to the Lord. Command to show kindness to animals. Verse 6 to 7. This is a command to show kindness to animals. If one finds a bird's nest with the young or eggs with the mother sitting on them, then you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall let the mother go and take the young. According to Jewish commentators, this is the smallest of all the commandments. Yet it carries a promise of blessing for those who are obedient. That is, that it may be well with you and that you may prolong your days. Miscellaneous laws. Deuteronomy chapter 22 verse 8 to chapter 23 verse 7. Protective fences around roofs and other dangerous settings. Verse 8. The Lord commanded that a railing be made for the rooftops and other dangerous settings, so that you may not bring guilt of bloodshed on your household if someone falls from it. Roofs of houses are used for various purposes, and if there is no restraining wall, one could easily fall off and be hurt. This commandment is warning against negligence of the safety of others. 4 laws of separation, verse 9 to 12. The Lord gave the following 4 commands to separate Israel from the pagan practices of the surrounding nations. The Lord commanded not to sow the vineyards with different kinds of seed. If it happens, then both the 2 harvested crops and the yield from the vines must be forfeited. Canaanites would combine different things to get magical combination, which was a pagan practice. This was also done for superstitious purposes, and the Lord prohibited it by this law. Do not plow with an ox and a donkey together. Among the Canaanites, it was common to combine different animals together for plowing. Some believed that this law was given to protect other animals from the breath of the donkey, which feeds on poisonous weed, which could result in lameness or, if continued for a long period, the death of the other animal. Tussles on 4 corners of the clothing. This law too was to distinguish Israel from their pagan nations. God spoke to Moshe about these tussles in Numbers chapter 15, verse 37 to 41. Israel shall have the tussles and look upon it and remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them, so that they will not follow the harlotry to which your own heart and own eyes are inclined. Laws concerning sexual immorality, verse 13 to 21. Rest of the verses in this reading is about the sanctity of marriage. A man is not to spread false stories that the woman he marries was not a virgin. If it turns out she was not a virgin, then the court of the city should punish her. If a man commits adultery with a married woman, then both should be executed. If a man rapes a betrothed virgin in the city, then both of them should be put to death. If a man rapes a betrothed virgin in the country, then only the man should be put to death. If a man rapes a virgin who is not betrothed, then he must marry her and may never divorce her. The woman must agree to the marriage. A man is not to marry his stepmother. A man with damaged sex organs may not marry. A mamza may only marry certain people. If it is a person born to parents who were not permitted to marry under Jewish law. A male Ammonite or Moabite who convert may not marry a woman born to Jewish parents. You are not to detest an Edomi because he is your brother, and not to detest an Egyptian because you lived as a foreigner in his land. The third generation of children born to them may enter the assembly of Adonai. Sanitary, ritual, and humanitarian precepts. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 8 to chapter 23, verse 24. Cleanliness in the camp. Verse 9 to 14. The Lord commanded that when Israel army goes out to war, it must ensure that the camp is free from every wicked thing. It required ceremonial cleanliness among the army of Israel. This refers to nocturnal emissions and the cleansing ceremony described in Leviticus chapter 15, verse 16 to 18. After the ceremonial washing, the soldier may come into the camp again. In addition to the sanitary cleanliness among the army of Israel, the soldiers are to carry, in addition to the weapons, a type of a shovel which could be used to cover the refuse. God commanded to maintain sanitary cleanliness. For the Lord walks among the midst of the camp. Israel had the tabernacle and the ark of the covenant, and his presence was there. But God's presence was not limited to the tabernacle or the ark of the covenant. His presence was everywhere. The commandment requires Israel to keep the camp clean, for the Lord walks in the midst of the camp to give Israel enemies over to them. And holiness must be maintained that he may not see any unclean thing among Israel and turn away from them. Asylum for foreign escaped slaves. Verse 15 to 16. The commandment concerns a slave from a foreign land enslaved by kidnapping. Exodus chapter 21, verse 16. And Israel was not to give back to his master the slave who has escaped from his master. Israel was to be a refuge for the oppressed slave of other people. An Israelite was not to take an escaped slave and enslave them again. He was free to live in whatever place that he chooses. Sacred prostitution banned. Verse 17 to 18. The Lord commanded that there should not be male or female prostitutes among the Jewish people. Both were common among the pagan religions and the Canaanite and other pagan nations in the ancient world. Wages of a harlot and the pay of a male prostitute were never to be offered to the Lord, for both these are an abomination to the Lord. Not to charge Jews with interest. Verse 19 to 20. The Lord commanded Israel not to charge any interest to a fellow Israelite. Interest on money or food or anything that is lent out at interest. To a foreigner they may charge interest, and the Lord will bless you in all to which you set your hand in the land which you are entering to possess. Commanded to pay the vows. Verse 21 to 23. The Lord commanded that the vows made to the Lord shall not be delayed, for the Lord will surely require it of you, and not to pay the vows would be a sin to you. The Lord commands Israel to be careful to keep its vows and fulfill every oath they make. Nowadays, breaking of an oath is just standard practice, but it is a sin before the Lord. If one abstain from vowing, then it shall not be a sin. But if you make a vow, you are to perform it. It is better not to vow than to vow and not pay. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 verse 4 to 5. Verse 24 to 25. The Lord commands that as you travel, you may have the right to pick off some grapes or heads of grain to eat along the way. But the command does not give the right to harvest from one's neighbor's field. Laws concerning marriage and divorce. Deuteronomy chapter 23 verse 25 to chapter 24 verse 4. Laws concerning divorce in ancient Israel. Verse 1. The Lord commanded that when a man takes a wife and marries her, and if she finds no favor in his eyes, because he has found some uncleanness in her, then he writes a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house. According to this law, divorce was allowed in Israel, but it had to be carefully regulated. A man cannot simply divorce his wife. The divorce had to be recognized legally by a certificate of divorce, just as the marriage had been. The verse, she finds no favor in his eyes because she has found some uncleanness in her. This gives a ground for divorce. It had to be found on these two clauses. Some define uncleanness as anything in the wife which might displease the husband. But in Matthew chapter 19 verse 3 to 10, Yeshua HaMashiach defined what uncleanness means in Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 1. He said, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. Uncleanness referred to is sexual immorality, which includes but not restricted to sexual intercourse with a person other than the spouse. Yeshua HaMashiach said, because of the hardness of your hearts, Moshe permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. A woman commits sexual immorality against her husband because of the hardness of her heart. And if her husband did not have any hardness in his heart, he could forgive his wife. Substance abuse and physical abuse are legitimate reasons a wife may want to divorce her husband. But the Torah and the Gospels does not address the criteria on which a woman may divorce her husband. Divorce was never to be permitted when it is done to marry another person. When a man or a woman who divorces his or her spouse to enter into another marriage, then the second marriage they entered into is adulterous, as the first marriage did not end on legitimate grounds for divorce. Matthew chapter 19, verse 10. The disciples said, if a man's relationship with his wife is like this, it is better not to get married. What they meant was that one should never enter into marriage thinking if things don't work out, divorce will be an option. Those who are to get married and those who are married, who want to have a marriage according to the Torah, must resolve that divorce will never be an option in their relationship. Divorce rates have increased in both secular and religious homes. Older generations manage to keep their vows, for better or worse, till death do us part, to each other. They face the same challenges, suffer the same weaknesses and character flaws that characterize marital problems today. Why the marriages in older generations did not end up in divorce is that they did not consider it as an option. It did carry a social stigma and was a religious taboo. When you don't consider divorce as an option, the couples find ways to make the marriage work. Miscellaneous laws. Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 5 to 24:13. Command to honor marriage. Verse 5. To honor and bless marriage covenant, the Lord commanded that when a man has taken a new wife, he is not to go out to war or be charged with any business. He shall be free at home 1 year and bring happiness to his wife whom he has taken. The men who were newly married were exempt from military service or other state service for 1 year. This provided them time to enjoy the bond of marriage and begin a family life and establish descendants. He is to bring happiness to his wife whom he has taken. Ephesians chapter 5 describes the role of the husband and emphasizes on the oneness between husband and wife. Apostle Paul described that the husband cannot make his wife happy without also bringing happiness into his own life. He cannot bring misery into the life of his wife without also bringing misery into his own life. A wife is made happy through the godly leadership of the husband, which becomes the foundation for a happy home. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 15, 21:9, 21:19 speaks of a contentious wife who makes her home miserable. Verse 6. A person who lends money may require the borrower to give an object as security for the loan. However, object that the borrower needs for support himself may not be taken as collateral. The example given in the verse is an upper or lower millstone may not be taken as collateral. This is a warning for God's people against taking advantage of each other in difficult times and never to profit from the poverty or difficulty of others. Verse 7. If a man is found kidnapping any of his brethren of the children of Israel and mistreats him or sells him, then that kidnapper shall die, and you shall put away the evil from among you. In the ancient world, kidnapping was done to sell the one abducted to slavery, as in the case of Joseph, who was sold to slavery. Affliction of Tzaraat, verse 8 to 9. The Lord commanded to take heed in an outbreak of Tzaraat and carefully observe and do according to all that the priests, the Levites, shall teach. How Tzaraat is to be examined and quarantine is given in Leviticus chapter 13 to 14. The warning was to ensure that the outbreak will not become a plague among the people. In Numbers chapter 12, Miriam was struck with leprosy, Tzaraat, because of her rebellion against Moshe. She was shut out of the camp for 7 days. Handling a pledge. for a loan. Verse 10 to 13. The lender who is taking a pledge from the borrower must treat the borrower with respect. The lender shall not go into his house to get his pledge. If the pledge was a garment or a blanket, and the man is poor, you shall not keep his pledge overnight, so that he may sleep in his own garment and bless you, and it shall be righteousness to you before the Lord your God. Various commands. Deuteronomy chapter 24 verse 14 to chapter 25 verse 19. Command to pay the workers. Verse 14 to 15. The Lord commanded not to oppress a hired servant. A servant may be oppressed by not being paid, by brutal or unsafe working conditions, or in many other ways. God's commandment is to treat them fairly and kindly. Give his wages daily and don't let the sun go down on it. Verse 16. Fathers shall not be put to death for their children, nor shall children be put to death for their fathers. A person shall be put to death for his own sin. Command to be compassionate. Verse 17 to 18. The Lord commanded not to pervert justice due to the stranger or the fatherless, nor take a widow's garment as a pledge. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord redeemed you from there. The foreigner or the orphan were often denied justice in the ancient world because they had no one to support their case. Concerning harvest, verse 19 to 22. During harvest, if one forgets a bundle, he must leave it for the gleaners. The gleaners must be allowed to glean from the olive trees and grapevines too. A limit on punishment, verse 1 to 3. If there is a dispute between men, they are to come to court, and judges will judge them and justify the righteous and condemn the wicked. If the wicked man deserves to be beaten, then he will be beaten in the presence of the judge, according to his guilt. 40 blows may be given and no more. An ox that is threshing grain must not be muzzled. Marriage obligation of surviving brothers. Verse 5 to 10. If a married man dies without children, then his brother should marry the widow. This is what is called Levirate marriage. The firstborn son she bears will succeed to the name of his dead brother. His name will not be blotted out of Israel. The brother may decline to marry the widow. Then the widow may go up to the gate of the elders and say to the elders that the brother will not perform the duty, and if he stand firm and say, do not want to take her, then the widow will remove his sandal from his foot, spit on his face, and say, so shall it be done to the man who will not build up his father's house. And his name shall be called in Israel, the house of him who had his sandal removed. Verse 11 to 19. Wives are forbidden to interfere in their husbands' fights. It is not permitted to keep two sets of weights or measures, one accurate and one not accurate. This is true even if the owner only uses the accurate set. We should always remember that the nation of Amalek did to the Jewish people when they left Egypt.